Seems to be working out here.
Fantastic.
Well, how are you, Mr. Trust?
I'm fine. I'm fine, Ethan. So you are a former student of ours at Inkrib
Yes.
Secondary,
Yes, I am.
and you're doing some really interesting things right now.
Interesting, very busy, very lots
Yes.
of work, to
Yeah.
say the least.
Tell me a little bit about your work.
I work at a research group at UBC, and we build little CubeSats. The
CubeSats. Yeah.
CubeSats, 10
Descri-
by 10 centimeter satellites.
Amazing. And do you have any of them going up into space anytime soon?
Not anytime soon. We have a
No.
lot in the labs, and we have a lot getting tested, but
Yeah.
10 in space yet.
Now, are they mostly payloads for satellites, or are they actual satellites themselves?
No, so they're actual satellites. Here, I've got a little model here I can show you.
Yeah.
So it's like to kind of describe it for people who are listening from the audio standpoint, it's like a 3D printed cube with solar panels that surround the outside of it.
Hmm.
Um, and this one I have here, this is just my desktop CubeSat.
Nice.
This would never survive in space, but yeah, and they've got boards on the insides and cameras on the outside and deployable antennas and the whole works.
So um, they are payloads in a rocket, and then once they get out, they're deployed as individual satellites.
Yeah, that's the best way to describe it.
Nice. And I'm Dave Truss. I'm principal of two schools in Coquitlam, the Inquiry Hub Secondary and Coquitlam Open Learning, the online school. And you came to our school for 2 years, I believe.
For yeah,
Yeah,
for 1 year, I
one
think,
year.
for my
Yeah,
grade 10 year, yes.
it was the grade 10 year. Yeah, excellent, excellent.
And quite an influential year, to say the least.
I don't know that we're going to talk much about that, but it certainly was an adventure having you in our school. I'll say
Yes.
that.
Well, one of the things that I think if it wasn't for, like, that year, I probably wouldn't have gotten into 3D printing and using Arduinos and stuff like that.
Yeah,
That was something that one of the teachers there definitely led me through a lot.
yeah,
And I think some of the stuff that you guys do, like your IDS,
yes.
I learned more in 1 year of doing an IDS than I think I did my last 2 years of high school.
Yeah, the teacher you're talking about is John Sarta. I've done a podcast with him,
Yep.
and IDS is independent directed study, and so
Yep.
it's a full year-long project where you design your own class, basically. Yeah. But
Yep.
you gave me a call today, a couple weeks ago, and wanted to chat and tell me about what your interests are. What do you want to chat about?
So I'm really interested in futurism, and I'm really interested in the future of education specifically, because I think we are going to be going through so many more challenges in the next 20 years that involve technology. And I think what you did at Inquiry Hub specifically was really ahead of its time. And throughout this pandemic, we've seen a lot more online education become mainstream. And I think that's just a reflection of, what was going on. That's definitely proof that Inquiry Hub was ahead of its time.
Yes. Yeah. Well, at Inquiry Hub, it's not really an online school. You come to school every single day,
Right.
and there are classes every day, but about 40%, and I think when you're there, even as high as 50% of your day, you're not actually sitting in a class in front of a teacher. And so you're designing your own learning and you're being self-directed during that time. And so one of the challenges of that are, I think sometimes when a student arrives at our school, they're not always ready for that much freedom.
Yep.
We talked already and mentioned Mr. Sarta's name, right? And do you remember the Spider-Man quote about responsibility?
I can't say I do, to be
With
completely
with great power comes great responsibility.
right.
Right.
Yeah.
So Mr. Sartre reverses that and says, with great responsibility comes great power. And I think that that's a real good summary of what our school is, because we give students that responsibility, and then they have the power to do the things that they want to do. And some people use that time really well and some don't. And we work on scaffolding that and providing support. I think you worked with our teacher, Miss Van Hulsen, right?
Yeah.
And if a student was struggling to figure out, or if a student has any learning needs, or if a student doesn't know how to use that time effectively, we actually have supports in place provided for that student to help guide them and make sure that they do and that they stay on pace and so on. But our ultimate goal is to give students that choice to say, well, I have homework from my classes, so I have to spend time on that. I have group work, because we do a ton of work where students are working in teams and groups, and learning different responsibilities around those roles, and how to do that fairly. And this year we even implemented a business model called Scrum, so that students are doing Scrum projects where they put value on how much each thing that they do is worth, and divide up the labor to create even better and more clarity around who's responsible for what, but then also working so committed as a team to really get stuff done faster and more effective. And so those are the kind of things that we look at to say, well, yeah, we're social beings and we have to work together, and we have to learn how to survive and thrive in a community. But then also we have the ability to say, well, what's your individual passion? What's your interest? And actually have time in the day where you're working on a passion project on something that you really want to do, right? What was your passion project about?
So I did a documentary.
Yes.
Very far from what I'm doing right now, but so I was a videographer right after high school, and I made ads for different startups for a good period of time. Sorry, there's a lot of background noise. I'm right on top of a garage door.
That's all right.
But well, yeah, I did a documentary there, and it was really interesting because I had the opportunity to dive into a lot of the local history of Millside, where Inquiry Hub's located.
Yes.
Um, and it was really cool because I had to focus a lot of individual brain power into um, trying to actually take the initiative and go out and talk to you about getting the superintendent out for an interview, and talk to the
Yeah.
different students about helping me with the lighting equipment and stuff like that. And it was pretty cool. But that Scrum model that you mentioned, it sounds a lot like what a research group does, like.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's actually I think it was computer programmers that initially started Scrums. There is a network of schools doing it, and they call it EduScrum now. And it's mostly in, I think, the Scandinavian countries where they do it. I don't know too many schools in North America that are, but what we're seeing is we're seeing a lot more students get things done on task, and the presentations that they're doing and the way they work together is so much better. Hey, one thing I have to say, for a grade 10, that was an exceptionally good movie that you created. Do you have it online somewhere?
I have a file. I have a file hidden within,
Oh, okay.
drive.
I would have loved to have shared it as a link, because one of the things that we really like to say at Inquiry Hub is we want to see students showcase their work and share it with the world. And I think you did a good job. And you're probably a little embarrassed at something you did at grade 10 right now, but I have to say that you have to realize that it actually was a very well done documentary. And
Well, thank you.
and the things that you said you had to do, right? Asking other students to help you with the lighting. I mean, we had students who would step out of their way and spend time doing things like that, even though they weren't getting credit for it, right?
Right.
We want always ask students that no matter what your project is, go out and speak to experts and to do those, and to extend yourself and to learn from the community. And you did that, right? And so those are the kind of things that I think are really good to see students do. And so,
Well, thank you.
when you talk about the future of education, I think that part of that future is having students feel like they own the learning.
Right.
And-
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. That definitely was a huge part uh, in helping me succeed. Was I kind of like I didn't feel included in, because of course I only went to Inquiry Hub for 1 year,
Yeah.
but in that 1 year I had a really good contrast from the traditional education system and then going into Inquiry Hub. And then my mom put me into a bunch of different tutoring programs, so I also
Mhm.
had that independent learning kind of
Yeah.
background. And I think at Inquiry Hub I felt the most ambition because
Yeah.
just it was more, there was so much more personal responsibility behind the
Yeah.
project, right?
Yeah. Well, I personally spent a fair bit of time reining you in.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
That's true. That
That
is
was one
very
of your
true.
challenges with the school, was like, yes, I know you love this idea and you want to head downtown in the middle of the day, but there's this other schoolwork that you haven't done, Ethan.
You know, who was I? So in where we are here in
Yeah.
Coquitlam, the year I went to Inquiry Hub
Yeah.
was the year that they officially opened the Evergreen line.
SkyTrain. Yes.
SkyTrain.
The SkyTrain line. Yes.
I was talking to my dad and we were driving past it the other day, and I was thinking about it because, you know, now we see it every day and it's kind of mundane. It's like, well, there's the SkyTrain, but I remember skipping school that day to
I
go.
remember that too.
and I will never forget that. That was the
Yeah.
only day I've ever seen so many people excited about a mundane form of public transit in one area.
Yeah. Do you, Mr. Truss, the SkyTrain's only going to open once. I have to be there for it. Yeah, it doesn't matter that you're supposed to be doing a presentation in class that day.
I got blasted by my parents after that one.
Yeah, well, you've grown a lot since then.
I hope I have.
Yes. Yeah. So where do you see education going in the next little while?
Well, I definitely think it's going to be a lot more hands-on. I think what you guys are doing at Inquiry Hub is definitely the model that a lot more institutions are bending towards now. Um, I think that if you if you implement more individualized projects in a school setting, that it allows for so much more possibility and potential into the different topics you study, right? Like earlier I mentioned Arduinos and 3D printing. uh, I didn't I back in Inquiry Hub I never thought that would have a practical application in my life, but all of our prototypes are 3D printed, and the first CubeSat I built was built with Arduinos. So, you know, it's stuff like that, learning from other people's ideas and passion projects that really, like, you would never have seen that in a regular high
Mm-hmm.
school.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think that.
Well, and it's interesting because I actually, when I think about schools in Coquitlam, there are actually quite a few of them that now have 3D printers and have teachers working with it. There was one that had a 3D printer before us, right? And so I think that the technology itself, that's something that it's already being implemented, and it doesn't have to be a special school to be able to do that. When you look at one of the interesting things is to look at the new BC curriculum, right? And the new BC curriculum has sort of three nodes, right? Know, do, and understand, right? And so that knowledge part is something that has always been in schools. That's been the focus, right? Let's give people knowledge, right? Inquiry Hub has sort of evolved into do and understand and put the pieces together even before the curriculum changed. But even more so, the new curriculum also doesn't just look at that. It looks at the core competencies. And the core competencies are sort of those skills that go beyond just the basic knowledge of school, right? And so it's communication skills, it's thinking skills, and it's those personal and social interpersonal skills.
Right.
And the right, and so those competencies are things that when you look, when you Google, what are the skills that you're going to need for a job in 2025, right? There are a series of those things around the problem solving, the ability to communicate and work in teams, the understanding of how to relate with people, your ability to, there's always the different kind of the 7 C's, and the different forms of communication that are important that you need to understand. And I think that those are the areas where Inquiry Hub does a really good job and allows students to have that exploration. And so the future of education, one of the things around it is, you know, when you try to put all those things together, but then you silo into separate subjects, and all you talk about is, your area of study, it misses incredible opportunities to make connections, and those kind of outside connections, those abilities to reach out and extend and understand how things are connected in the world and related in the world. I think that that's the focus, right? The metaphor I use are streams and silos, right? And so streams silos are, math, science, and even science. This is physics, this is chemistry, this is biology and anatomy, and right,
Right.
and English and history, and and it's funny because in elementary school we teach humanities, right? So it's, you put the English and socials together, but when you get into high school, you've got to teach it separately. Well, our senior humanities teacher takes turns teaching English and history together one year, and English and philosophy the other year, and
Right.
so he intertwines the curriculum. He creates opportunities where you're writing an essay on philosophy, but you're also getting credit for your ability to write in English, and so it reduces how much he has to teach for the two courses. But then has these intellectual discussions, like last year, I remember walking into a discussion in our hallway after, he'd had a really long class with students kind of debating things. And I walk into the hallway and I get into this conversation with two students about existentialism, and both of them were in grade 11. They weren't in grade 12s. And the conversation was so far above my own understanding, I could barely participate. Right. And so the depth that you can go in when you allow that, reduce the amount of work that you have to do so that you can go in depth into the different things becomes really, really powerful. And so
Oh no, that's true.
that's the piece that kind of excites me about breaking those silos and going into streams, and so when you're focused on a stream instead of a silo, you can look at some a scientific um, uh, like I'll give you an example. You can look at something like a biome, right? And when you look into a biome, you can then say, all right, well, what are the human impacts? What are the social impacts to this biome, right? What kind of research can you do, and what kind of math can you derive, and what kind of things can you actually study, and what kind of experiments can you actually do and test your hypothesis. And so now you're really going to science at a different depth, as opposed to name 7 different biomes and describe the kind of animals that are inside that biome, right? And
Right.
so instead of it being this categorical silo, it becomes this stream where you're looking at environmental impact and social issues and different things like that. And that to me is a way that, well, first of all, that's far more interesting for students, because they can go in depth into things that they find really interesting, but then they're also watching presentations from other students who are learning other aspects that they may not have dug into as much. And you watch kids still get very focused and still get some expertise in an area, but they're also learning the breadth and the interconnectedness, and they're having to communicate that to different people.
Right. No, for sure. And I think that's if it wasn't for that aspect of Inquiry Hub specifically,
Yeah,
I definitely wouldn't have been interested in computer science, because
right.
as we mentioned earlier, I actually had no background in computer science whatsoever when I first came to Inquiry Hub, but it was listening to other people's presentations and seeing how passionate they were about
Yeah.
talking about code, which before going to Inquiry Hub to me was a completely different language, and now I work in C++ every day. So it was
Yeah.
that turning point that definitely got me into computer science and space related stuff a lot more, for sure.
I thought you were going to be a filmmaker.
I did too.
And and looking at another idea around the future of education, it's been very interesting going through the pandemic as we have. A lot of things jumped to online, and in March, all the schools in BC, we went to remote learning.
Yeah.
And I think it was a month to 6 weeks later, then we gave the option to come back. But uh, it was sort of 1/3 to 50%. I don't think it ever exceeded 75% of students coming back, and that proved to be extremely challenging, because now you had to teach the students that were there, but then also teach the students at a distance. And I think that actually set us back. So the initial step of going online, everybody had to learn basic skills that took most schools from, these are the experts. We have in our school these um, technology gurus. They know what they're doing. They have the ability to present and do amazing things with technology. And then we have the right down in a large spectrum, all the way down to a technophobe who is like, I'll use an LCD projector, right? And I'll put the occasional thing, but up like a movie. But I'm the teacher in the front of the room, and I'm going to share my stuff, and I'm going to give you paper handouts, and and you had everything in between. What the initial impact of going remote learning did was it brought that bar right up, right? And so our district, we're a Microsoft district, so we have already have every student, every teacher is on Teams, has OneNote, has a Drive, right? The OneDrive. You have all these tools, but no one was using them. And then with the shift, it was like, other than sort of kindergarten, grade 1, and then we also had I should say too, fresh grade, which is um, teachers can share things with parents as well as students, and provide not only assignments but share feedback and so on with students. But when you factor in all those tools, the engagement that we had across the entire district of students involved with the technology and the teachers was incredible, right? And a lot of it had to do with there were webinars and actual teachers who were even before this, our technology teachers were considered pedagogical support teachers. So it wasn't just about here's the technology, but here's the technology and why you want to use it. Well, weeks 1, 2, and 3, it was like, this is just how you use the technology. That's all they did. But then they started to shift and go, here's the power of what you can do, and here's how you can do it, and start to engage. It took a step back when it went optional, because when it went optional, now the teacher had to think about, I have to provide the support for the student that's in the school, and I have to provide the support for the students abroad. And it became this extremely taxing and challenging thing. And for some schools and some, for Inquiry Hub, it didn't really matter to us, because we focus on a lot of different things that allow different opportunities. If it was group work, we had the individual teams, one person might be online and the others not, but we could still be able to do it. And even to start this year, we had a couple students that started full remote. And if other schools did that, then those students actually had to go into a completely separate program. For us, we just did it, and we just allowed it, and got special permission, by the way, to do that. We didn't go rogue, but we were in a position to do that. And I have to be honest, it's not like I'm saying, oh, I said that specifically. We were in a specific position to do that. We're a school of under 70 kids. We have teachers who are prepared to be able to do that, and have been OneNote and Teams were something we were already using in the past. We're extremely comfortable with the technology. The way we run the classes, and the fact that we don't have classes for students all day, means the student at home doesn't have to sit in front of a computer for, if you were doing this in a regular school and trying to run it, a student would have to sit for 4 classes for 4 hours, for 70 minutes every single day in front of a computer. Our students at home didn't have to do that, right? They didn't have to be engaged on the computer all day. So we were unusually equipped to be able to provide this, that a school of 1,200 trying to provide that service where the days are broken into blocks, it would have both killed the teacher and killed the student trying to do it at home, right? And so not a positive experience all the way around. But why I mentioned that is when teachers had to do both, I think that hurt the pedagogy. That hurt the kind of teaching that they did, because they had to go back and say, well, I'm going to just do this in my class because that's easy to share here, as opposed to I'm going to do this because it's a really exciting and engaging opportunity for students, right?
Right.
And so so that's one of the things that I think, BC, it's been a challenge, and it's been in some cases, in some districts, a scary experience for teachers having to teach with a lot of their students face to face in a time when there's a pandemic, right? And there's issues of not wearing masks in class, which makes teachers very uncomfortable. And it's been a very high stress situation, but it's also been a better situation than trying to juggle the 50% remote, 50% there. And it's a better experience than being 100% remote. So
Right.
we're in a position where it'll be interesting when the vaccine comes, when we're a lot more comfortable going back to quote unquote normal. Well, what's normal going to look like? Are teachers going to suddenly say, I don't need to use OneNote anymore, I don't need to engage in Teams, or are they going to embrace and kind of move everything forward? And that's an interesting thing that time will tell. But I'm hoping that idea of using technology, it's a shift. It's a shift from, hey, look at these neat new tools, I'm going to add this little flash and this little pizzazz and this cool little tool, I'm going to add it to what I do, to something that's in the background. Well, I have this, right? This is part of my tool belt. This is part of what I can do. This allows me to do certain things that I couldn't do before, right? It allows me to have asynchronous and synchronous opportunities in my class, as opposed to my class is in front of me, so the class is happening now. Happens all at this time. It can be this part we do separately, right? I have students now they're in my class, but I don't fill the whole class with me lecturing or me teaching, and then them all doing the exact same thing, but I have them reporting out on what they're sharing and what they're doing in my class that's different from each other, more self-directed, and having that opportunity, um, and having that ability for the class to extend into the community a little bit or outside of that time. And that doesn't mean giving kids tons of homework. That just means giving kids that opportunity and that flexibility to decide when they want to do something versus not, and then helping them with that, helping them be responsible enough after you've given them that power.
And stuff like the IDS, that's literally what I experienced.
Yeah.
And I think that community outreach, using the documentary as an example, that was getting those interviews was a huge, turning point. I think
Yeah.
if it wasn't for everyone at Inquiry Hub pushing me to kind of go out of my way and approach adults, that I wouldn't be where I am today, in the sense where I wouldn't have talked to people who have a lot more knowledge than me. And I think that's another really important part of high school that Inquiry Hub does really well. When you go out and you make the effort to approach experts and in their field, and you go out and approach people who are really high up in the community in their respective niches and genres, you learn a lot more, right?
Yes.
And that's a really cool aspect of Inquiry. But that's a perspective that I think somebody like me really doesn't think about, right? Because we aren't educators,
Yeah.
right? So that's really interesting to hear, for sure.
Well, the other aspect of that too is, I mean, yeah, we give you an IDS, and not all grade 10s get IDSs, especially now, like, but we also had an inquiry course that you had to do, right?
Right.
And that inquiry course involved doing smaller projects, learning the steps, understanding what it means to do an inquiry, understanding what it means, like what are you doing? We ask you, who's the expert that you can contact when you're doing this? We don't necessarily say in grade 10 you have to, but we ask you that question, right? We ask you what kind of research you're doing. We have you reflect on your process. We have you present even when you're not ready, because it's time to present, and then looking at your process and what would you do differently. And if you were, yeah, you didn't get it done, but if you were to extend this, what would your next step be? Right. What challenges did you have? And so and when you're not just listening to your own, you're listening to the other students present on that, you're learning those steps, and one interesting thing that happens is, whenever, we do interviews for students coming in, and parents always ask, well, what happens when a student doesn't know who the expert is or needs help? Like, do you guys provide support for that? And of course we do, but one of the interesting things that I've found over the years is we very rarely need to do that, right? We had a student doing a study on tooth decay, and he wanted to look into that, and he made a list of 20 different people he can contact. The third one he contacted was a UBC prof who gave him full access to his lab and 2 research assistants to work with him in the study of this, using bacteria to clean your teeth, right? And he didn't, I would not have been able to find that kind of, maybe I could have, but it would have taken a lot of work on my end. But by grade 11, he made the list himself. It wasn't like we asked him to do this, right? And he made the first 2 phone calls that didn't work on his behalf, and then still knew to make the next call. All right. And we see that a lot. We see people who find their own mentors. They find, and sometimes it's like that, where you're just calling a stranger. Other time it's like my dad's, we had someone making his own music, and he was a guitar player and had all kinds of skills, but his dad's friend had a neighbor who was a drummer, and he ended up having this drummer do all the drumming for his music, right? And And yes, would we be able to go and help him find somebody that could do that? We could, but I'd say not even 9 times out of 10, I'd say 19 times out of 20, the student is finding that person themselves, right? And that's something that you wouldn't expect, right? And so that's, to me, those are the kind of skills that I think are really important. And the fact that they're willing to put themselves out there and ask, that's one of the things I most like about what I see students do when you give them this independent time and the ability to really go after something that they want to do as opposed to something that they have to do for school.
No, for sure. And that also kind of teaches the values of networking, right? Something that,
Yes.
really comes into place, especially once you're, out of school and you're in university. And I mean, that's kind of the flow of things, right? You go from high school to university, and then in university, they sit you down in big rooms and try and get you a job, right? So if you're already learning those skills back in like grade 10, grade 11, you're already ahead of the game for sure.
Yeah. And so, bringing the conversation back to like that future of education, one of the other things that I see that I'm like kind of excited about where education is going is, and I mentioned it before, but I'll extend on it, is that idea that technology isn't the focus of it, but it's what you do with the technology that's really important. And one of the things that technology allows that I've hinted on is that idea of that blended learning experience, right? That idea that not everything has to happen in the classroom and not everything has to happen um, synchronously at the same time for every student. And I think that what technology allows is technology allows for that freedom of a teacher to be able to have students do more diverse things and have assignments that provide more choice, where it's not the cookie cutter, everybody's doing the same thing, right? On a metaphorical level, I can give you something that's at a much younger age that was something that really kind of struck me. uh, I remember walking through an elementary school once, and it was just before Christmas, and I walked by a classroom, and there was a bulletin board of it was I I think it was gingerbread houses made out of construction paper, right? And there was a background behind and everything, but it was a project where you could tell that the teacher had this plan where almost everything in every picture looked identical, right? And so you had the same styled roof made out of the same colored materials, right? Someone might have done the different color gumdrops, but the gumdrops were all laid out on the roof the exact same way. Every house was the center. Everybody had one tree. Everybody had, somebody might have had a night sky and somebody had a day sky, but really you looked and it was almost identical. And then I walked by another bulletin board, and it was sort of a snow scene, a snowman scene. And it was obvious that these kids had just way more freedom, right? Some of them had carrot noses, some of them had stick noses, some of them didn't have noses, right? Some of them had 3 or 5, snowmen and little kids, and and it was, if you looked at them, the gingerbread display was a beautiful display. If you looked at the other one, you had some amazing ones, and you had some pretty like kind of immature ones, and it was sort of chaotic. But I thought about it, and it was like, I want my kid in the snowman one class. I don't want my kid doing art and having to follow this cookie cutter. And there's nothing there is, to some extent, there's nothing wrong with having some of those. So I'm being unfair to the teacher, because sometimes when you want to teach a specific skill, right? If you have everybody drawing a face, right? And there are rules to faces, right? You know, like you may not know this, but your face is 5 eye widths across, with 1 eye width between your eyes and 1 eye width to get to the side of your face. It's just it's a mathematical thing that all faces share, right? And so when a kid draws a face and the eyes are too far apart, it suddenly looks a little weird, right? Like it just looks wrong,
Yeah.
and you may not be able to know why. You may not look and go, oh, the eyes are too far apart. But if you don't teach those basic skills and get everybody practicing doing those things, so you know, I'm being a bit unfair because that's just one assignment. But when I look at what I want a kid to do, I want my kid, when they're doing art, not to just follow the cookie cutter. I want them to be able to show their artistic expression, and to be able to do something where the teacher has allowed them the freedom to be creative and to do something different, right? And so let's move that up to high school, right? And there are times when teachers spent hours creating these amazing projects, but then every student has to study the exact same component, the exact same, right? Their final presentation all follows this cookie cutter format, represented in the exact same way, right? Whereas, you know, I know there were times, I know for a fact there were times when we said, Ethan, you can't do a video for this. You're writing an essay, because we're not evaluating your ability to tell a story visually. We're evaluating your ability to write. And
Right.
so there are times when we're going to limit and say that, but there are many times you got to represent your learning in a completely different way than somebody else, on not just your IDS where you're working, but on your actual project that you got to do for the class. You got to choose and have that freedom to express it in a way that worked better for you. And that, to me, is something that I think schools are getting better at, but we still have a long way to go where you can learn, well, what freedoms can you give, but then what parameters do you have to have, and what expectations, and you know, what are the outcomes that you still want the student to achieve, no matter how they represent it. And there are times when a video won't work, but there are times when it absolutely will. And what you're able to do in expressing it in a way that you feel powerful can create a depth that the cookie cutter lesson just doesn't.
And no, that's so true. There was another individual in my grade
Yeah.
who videos were my thing, but websites were his. And websites were so foreign to me, but he would, you know, for some of his in-class projects, he would code a website just for that in-class project. It would blow my
Yes.
mind. You know, like
Yeah.
there's people who spend tons of money to just, you know, get their website, their business online, right? And he's out
Yes.
here just, you know, building them for class projects. That was,
Yeah.
I didn't understand it. But
I think
now,
I know who you're talking about. He's actually being paid to do that right now still. So
well, there you
yeah.
go.
Yeah.
But now here's something that I'm really interested in terms of the future of education here. There's this balance between sort of creativity and chaos,
Hmm.
right? And do you think that implementing a lot more technology into the learning process, like bringing AI into it, do you think that will inhibit kind of this new cookie cutter sort of rhythmic, or do you think it'll help bring out
Yeah.
creativity in its own way?
So that's an exciting question, and it's one that I've actually thought a lot about, right? And you know, I think when you talk about AI and school, that there is a stream that has fear and ego, and there's both of those things playing off of each other, right? And so the ego is, oh, a computer can never replace a teacher, right? And and um, in many respects, absolutely they're right, but in some they're wrong, right? And so that's the part where I think we need to look at and explore, right? And so I'll use a specific example. Um, Math right now, right? Most times it goes online what you see is you see, well, normally I teach this class and I do stuff on my whiteboard, and I write down the lesson and I show people and I give people a visual lesson. Well, I can have a whiteboard online and I can talk over it and I can give a math lesson, right? And so the experience of the chalkboard online becomes experience of the chalkboard on the computer, right? And if it's a chalkboard on a computer, it has one advantage, and that one advantage only, right? Well, I'll call it two. One is you can do it on your own time. You can rewind the teacher without having to raise your hand, right? So that's 1 and 2, right? I can watch it again. I can watch it on my own time. If I don't understand, I don't have to ask the teacher to repeat, right? And 2, I don't have the stigmatism of going, I don't get it, because I can just do that amount, right? So, excuse me. So those are the advantages, but really having a teacher in the class giving that lesson and being able to interact instead of watching a stagnant video, putting that video online isn't that much different. There's not that much of an experience different. And I would argue that in that situation, having a live teacher can be better, and for many reasons. Okay. But let's flip that now and let's talk about actually solving problems in math, right? I think that there are tons of games and activities that you can do that make things like learning the multiplication tables way more engaging than trying to learn it at school, right? Learning those algorithms, following those patterns, doing those things, you can play games and actually learn, right? And it's engaging and it's interesting. And here's the thing. One of the biggest problems I had as a grade 8 teacher who taught and explored a lot of big problems, where there was no one right answer to the problem, or, like, I remember this one activity, and I got it from one of my colleagues, Mike Slinger, who was actually a math support teacher who studied a person by the name of Peter Liljedahl, and he got this question from them. And it's like, you have 2 marbles, right? You can break both of them. Your job is to figure out at what height do these marbles break on a 40-story building, dropping them off the building, right? And so you can break both marbles. What's the pattern to go up and figure out, because if you go too high and drop one, and then you go too, right? What's the least amount of times you can progress, right? What's the least amount of marble drops you can use in order to do this, right? And there's all kinds of patterns and all kinds of problems. And, I think at one point I thought the least amount you could do for a 40-story building was 11. And then some kid figured out 10. And then I figured out 9, right? And 9 different drops to figure out. No matter what level the marbles dropped at, you could figure this out. That is like, I'm sure there's somebody that's, a PhD in math that can come up with this incredible formula where they can tell you the absolute lowest is this, right? But for grade 8s, that's a messy, hard problem, right? But when you're doing those problems and students don't understand those basic math, basic math concepts of multiplication, the foundational math stuff, when they don't get that, they can't get past, it'll take you 39 drops because you have to try first floor and then second floor, right? And you need to understand and have some basic core math skills. So going back to your question, AI is better at teaching the computational things, right? It is better at, a student is getting a progressively harder questions through the computer, and then they get one wrong. And when they get it wrong, because the computer, the AI, has seen 3 million people get that question wrong, and they know what the answer is that the student gave, They can say, this is what the student is thinking. I'm going to step back and give them this problem, and then or this mini lesson, and that will help them with that problem, as opposed to, I'm going to just try from the base and take them all the way back and just teach them, they don't know how to do this. I'll take them here and everybody will do this. AI will know, they got this answer. This is the concept they don't understand. They got this wrong answer. This is the concept they don't understand. Provide timely, direct feedback to the individual student so that they can progress and move faster and get that feedback to know what they're specifically doing wrong, right? I'm not saying a teacher can't do that, but a teacher can't do that with 30 kids in a class without holding back other kids while they're teaching another kid, right? One of the frustrations that one of the, we had a student who came to our school before you in grade 9. And he told us in the grade 9, he said, I'm only here for 1 year. I want the big high school experience. I want to go. And so at the end of grade 9, I got him into a class in April or May. He said, what school are you going to? Do you know anybody there? I got permission. He followed his friend around for a day. And he said, he came back to me and he goes, Mr. Truss, I can't believe how much time they waste in a regular school, right? You walk in the class and it's like you spend all this time doing attendance, and then they open their books and then they check their homework, and everybody has to sit there and listen to the same answers to the homework, even if they got it right. And then, and he started to describe all the different things that are done in this format. And he said, I'm staying for 1 more year, right? He just wasn't ready to go to that experience. And I think that AI can take some of that learning away. Some of the, right? It can take it where it's like, I'm giving Ethan what Ethan needs. Ethan is highly functional and skilled in this area and struggles conceptually in this area. The AI knows, and the AI allows you, to challenge yourself here, or takes advantages from there and gives it over here where you're struggling, gives you visual examples because it knows it's visual, gives you something more auditory because it knows. I'm not a believer in the learning styles. I do believe everybody is visual, but some people do pick things up and really, you are extremely auditory. And you always have been, all right? And you needed to hear things and to work through it in a way that I saw few students need, right? And I think AI can do that. And then what does that mean? That doesn't mean the AI has replaced the teacher. What that means is when the teacher has the student, the teacher can spend the time on those really interesting, drop the marble problems and the bigger problems and the conceptual problems, and the actually relating the math to things that are outside of math, because they have time in their day to make those connections instead of saying, I need to get this next lesson done and this next lesson and this next lesson, because in the next grade, they have to know how to do these things, right? When a student, I taught grade 8 science, and you have to teach the scientific method, right? But I can tell you, I was not a great science teacher because it took me too long to figure out that having students struggle with an actual experiment where they don't realize that they have to measure only one item, and not have several things factoring in that influence their and I'm losing the name of it, the independent versus dependent variables, right? And so when people are mixing those up and then they're trying an experiment where there are too many independent variables that can factor into what their results are, and they end up with these awful results. Well, you can teach a scientific method over and over again, but until somebody's doing something really messy that's hard to measure, instead of the cookie cutter, really easy to measure experiment in the textbook that only allows you to have that one variable that changes. But when the kid is actually doing an experiment where there are multiple things that can go wrong, and then you show them, and then they have to figure out, well, how do I refine this so that I'm not experimenting and looking at 17 variables at once? That's when the science gets real, right?
Right.
That's when it gets real. And if AI is teaching some fundamental basics so that you understand and doing it better than a human can, then humans can do what they know best. And that is get into the messy parts, get into the interesting parts, get into the problem solving, getting into the questions that don't have a single answer, or the experiments that don't have one simple result, because that's what life is. There's almost nothing where you have one variable that changes in life and that's all that you have to factor in, right?
That
But
sounds like a very easy life.
yeah, it does. Life doesn't work that way. And so I look and I go, AI can do some very good things in an engaging way that actually helps a student, right? With interventions with teachers when they don't get it, when they struggle, with interventions from support teachers when they might have a learning disability or a challenge that doesn't allow the computer to give them the same thing other people are. And so
Sorry.
that's okay. And so that to me is where AI can be married to what's happening in schools and add value, not just be the shiny new tool that's hey, look, we can do this way, but like integrated into what we do, right? And so super engaging, interactive, on-time learning for individual kids in a school, but then they come together as a class and take that learning. And when I say come together class, they could be doing some of that AI stuff in the class. It's not like now that becomes the homework, right? That's the other thing that people do. They think of flipped classroom means, oh, they can learn outside of class. And then when we get together, we do these interesting things. But I worry about that too, because if everybody's flipping their class, then what potentially you're seeing is now I have to go home and do an hour of work for each of my classes, right? To be ready for this. And it's like, I already struggled with kids consistently getting their homework done anyway. And now I'm putting more of it at home where you don't know what their home life is like. You don't know what distractions they're going to have, right? You don't know, you've got the garage door going up and down, right? Like there are people who they're kids who, at 15 years old have to work to help pay the rent for their family, right?
Oh, yeah.
There are people at home that are using a computer that's 5 years old and has all kinds of problems, or has one computer in the household that has to be shared by everybody, right? There are students who come home and have no home support because both parents work until it's their bedtime, right? And so we don't know those things, and we shouldn't be just flipping classrooms and saying, now go do this at home so that you'll be ready for the class so I can teach you the really interesting stuff. It has to happen in the class as well, right? And so
Yeah.
so that shift is something I think, and that's one of the things I like about Inquiry Hub is there's time in the day to do those things. And when you don't understand, there's a teacher available. And it's not always the right teacher. There are times when you have to say, well, I need a math teacher, but my math teachers are teaching other classes. My friends can't help me. So I guess I'll work on something else. But I know I'm going to get one-on-one time with my teacher later on because they're going to be available, right? And that's another learned skill, instead of self-helplessness, it's like, oh, teacher isn't here, I guess I'll play a video game.
And
Yeah.
you know what? So I kind of have a weird experience. I have an IEP. So I
So
got
that's
the
a individual education plan, right? IEP.
yes.
Yeah.
I had the opportunity to use a computer in the classroom at grade 6. And I'm very fortunate that, my parents were able to get me a computer, and I was able to bring it in, and all the teachers let me. And, in grade 6, I think it was kind of weird because, like I was one of the only kids in my, grade 6 class that were using a computer, but I really struggled between playing this game called Angry Bears and, like, the temptation was something that, I
Yeah.
really had to train myself to not do. And especially, through high school, and eventually, it kind of sinks. Well, hey, this is your personal responsibility. You have to do this.
Yeah.
But now, one of the things I see a lot of people kind of critique, and I don't think it's a very fair critique, because, obviously as educators, you guys have, certain outlines that the government asks you to fill. But
Mhm.
there's always this question: how does a teacher grade creativity, and
Yeah.
how does a teacher grade art, and so forth and so forth. But I think that's an example of one of the interesting things that you were talking about, right?
Mhm.
Where, AI might have the answer that, yes, there's, 5 eye spaces between, each
Yeah.
eye, but Picasso might think differently, right? So, uh,
Yes. Yeah. But
how
yeah. Well, one part about that, you talk about Picasso doing it differently. Picasso could paint realistically, right?
Yeah.
He had the skills. And I think that one of the things people miss is to be Picasso, right? To be Kandinsky and create art with, circles, right? To really to be that kind of artist, you actually have to understand art at a fundamentally core level, right? There are set skills that you can learn that allow you to be able to have the freedom later to create, to be creative. And I think that some people miss that sometimes, and they think, well, every kid can be creative, but like uh there's I wrote a blog post about it. I think it was Picasso. Um, and he does some artwork with a bull. Um, and I'm just gonna, of course, I can't find it. Is it Picasso? I think so. Um, Anyway, he does a line art where it's like, I think he uses 7 lines to create a bull. And the work he does to get to that is he originally draws a detailed bull, and then he slowly reduces down to the fact that it just becomes 7 lines. And this 7 lines is obviously a bull, right? But his work to get there, he had to truly understand what a bull was. If he started by trying to just do that line, it just wouldn't have worked, right?
Right.
And so um I think I called it cut the bull. No, I can't find it. And
That's a very fitting title.
this is actually one of the interesting things when you end up I just realized I'm actually looking on the wrong blog when I'm trying to look for this. And one of the things about sharing stuff all over the place is um, you sometimes forget where you store stuff. Yeah. So yeah, it was August 2018. I wrote cut the bull, and so it's a series of 15 drawings, and it's just amazing when you look at what he did to get to that final drawing, right? And so those are the kind of things where creativity does not just come it's not something that doesn't come without some skill. It's not something that kids just naturally have. And not to say you can't be naturally creative. A lot of kids, you hear people say, oh, that kid's so creative. But that creative kid can still benefit greatly from learning some traditional skills, right? Understanding, if going back to math, we'd be doing problem solving, and I remember getting this aha moment with this one kid, and I used to give these nasty bonus questions, and when I say nasty, I mean like because in math, one of the things that would happen is you give a math test and you can't have other people be distracted and noisy when they finish the test. But if you're giving a test in a 50-minute class, right, you want that test to last for most kids only about 30 minutes, because you want the kid that struggles to have an extra full 20 minutes to be able to do it. Right? You don't want to restrict a kid who needs more time by giving them a test where the smartest kid's gonna be, barely finish it, because then
Right.
you're testing the kid's speed. You're not testing their ability for most of the other kids. So that leaves kids finished where there can be reading or doing something, but they have to be quiet because they have to be respectful of the other kids in the test. So I used to give these nasty problems that would take a kid 15 minutes to get to the answer. Right? And some of them were trick questions and some of them were nasty. But I remember this one question that I had that was sort of, grade 8, but it was sort of a grade 9 math question where you had to solve this massive equation and the final answer was like 1 or -1. Right? And this one kid got one of the first things he did was like he had to reduce a fraction, which was something like 7/28, right? Which would
Right.
become 1/4,
Right.
right? But made the mistake of making it 1/5, right? So he said 28 divided by 7, that's 5, right? Simple little mistake. It made the question so much harder, because now instead of a nice rounded number, he ended up doing double the work because it didn't round and going into ridiculously long fractions and this disastrous thing. But every component of his math after that, not only was it right, it was way harder math than the question originally asked. Right. And I remember giving him full marks for this. Like, it was like, you just proved that you know how to do math at a higher level than I expected you to do. Right. All right. But the reason I tell you that story is because the fundamentals killed him.
Right.
Right. If he had the fundamentals, and if there was no way at grade 8 that he would make that mistake and go, yeah, 28 divided by 7 is not 5, it's 4.
Right.
If he had that skill, he would have had to have done half the work. Right. Right. And so that's the thing that people don't realize is people have to have fundamental skills. It doesn't matter if it's math or art.
Right.
Right. You've got to give people those core skills. I think that in some instances, AI can do that better than humans. In others, we can teach it better, right? I don't know. I don't know that there's a computer program that's going to teach someone how to draw a face better than a teacher giving feedback, or a video lesson, or right. I don't think AI is specifically going to be able to do that, right?
Right.
And maybe I'm wrong, but my point being, I if it is true, it's probably years away from
Right.
a computer being able to look at something and then give fundamental feedback on how an artist can improve and make something more realistic, right? So, creativity is a tricky thing, right? It's one of the places where I think we have the most ability as teachers to allow students that freedom, right? To rein them in when their creativity means doing something sloppy and not really thinking it through, and to give them the freedom to do something differently. You know, we have a school who a student designed the logo, right? We have a motto of dream, create, learn. Well, we started with connect, create, learn, and it was students that changed it to dream, right? And so we're giving the kids the power. And by the way, I hated that, right?
Really?
I couldn't stand the idea of the word dream, because I was like, we're a new school, we're trying to build. Parents don't want their kids to go to a dreamy place. They want kids to go somewhere to learn, right? I thought it was an awful marketing tool, but I let it happen. It went to a vote. It was a decision. It was like a mural. I thought, well, just because it's a mural doesn't mean it has to be something that represents our school. But now we call that independent time DCL time, time to dream, create, learn, right?
Right.
Now, Mr. Sartre and students are looking at saying, well, learning is a given. Let's call it dream, create, launch, right? And we're looking now at, because we have kids launching into businesses and trying new things and learning how to make that leap in a way that that I think represents our school more than the word learn does, right? Because it's the launch is uh, more metaphorical to and fits better to what we're talking about, right? But that process, that ability to go through that, to have students engage in that and to feel like they own it, and to now be, one of the projects that we're doing in the class right now are students are picking an area of the school and designing murals for it, right? And they have to represent that, and we're creating a budget, both myself and we're requesting from the pack as well to provide money for the ones who sort of get their ideas chosen, right? And the fact is, some will be chosen and some won't.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with that sense of competition being part of school, and everybody gets a chance, but some of the ideas aren't worth putting on our wall, right?
Right.
And we're not going to put everybody's experience, murals on the wall when some of them don't really haven't been thought through enough, or and some good ideas will be put aside too because of our budget. We have a limited budget and we can't go and spend thousands of dollars just on paints and creating sculptures and different things for space. And so there's a lot of things that we can do in our school that allow students to be extremely creative and to put stuff out there, but then still have a bar of expectation, right, of what it looks like and what the have those ideas been thought through, right? And it's interesting because I've gone into the class and I've been keenly aware that I've given some ideas and I've had to say, I'm just one opinion, because all of a sudden it's like, well, the principal likes this idea more than this one, and all of a sudden the teacher, the students are like weighing what I say, and I'm like pulling away their own creativity because I like something a little better, and I'm keenly aware of that, and so I watch, and something I'm trying to get better at is asking the question instead of giving the suggestion, right? And so those are the kind of things where we as educators have that opportunity to direct the creativity without giving them the cookie cutter again, right?
Right.
And
Well,
so
yeah. It's really interesting because it's you have so many different broad ideas, and I think the mural example is really one of them. You have so many different students producing kind of what they think is bar none the best art out there, but as an educator you guys have a particular challenge in not only picking the best mural or the mural that is universally agreed on to be the one selected, but you also have this burden of letting the people who weren't selected know, hey, we decided to go with this one.
Yeah.
And then you have to answer that, like, what's that process like? How do you give feedback but also get a positive response.
Yeah. And that for us, that reflection process that one thing I haven't mentioned is one of the other things that we do a lot of is students doing their own reflections, and um, uh, that idea of you asked about measuring creativity. Well, one of the things that to help you with that is students reflecting on their own work, right? And one of the interesting things about the competencies that I mentioned is the fact that uh, um, you don't grade those, right?
Right.
You give feedback on those, but you don't grade. Congratulations, you got an A in creativity, right? You know, um, that's not as effective as you demonstrated your creativity here. One aspect of that you could think about more is here, right? And that sort of that kind of assessment, and it's not just summative, right? It's formative assessment as you're doing the process, right? So watching the presentations, Mr. Sarto was asking students, like one student had 3 words on their poster. And, one of the suggestions he gave is he said, I'm not sure how well they fit together. Right. So he said, make your artwork black and white and move the words and change the fonts and change the words and see what it looks like in black and white, and make sure that it right. So now you're taking away the distractions of all the color and the thing. And that is now something where they can experiment and they can look at it in a different way. Right. So instead of them trying to just fit them together, they're actually seeing the image in a different way to see how it fits. And then you put the color back in, right? That's a master teacher thinking about the design in a different way than someone who says, have you tried Comic Sans, right? Which, by the
Right.
way, you should never do. But but do you understand my point, right? And so that's not telling the student what they did right or wrong. That's giving the student feedback to go back and see their work in a different way, and to reflect on, well, how do these things really fit together, right? And
Yeah.
maybe they don't. Maybe it's better not to have the words, or maybe it's better to make the words separate and not part of the thing, so that they're they're not taking away from each other. And
Right.
so so those are the kind of things where I think there's tons of opportunity for creativity, and for teachers to help with that, and to provide opportunities for learning without the cookie cutter.
So I guess bringing it kind of back to the future of education,
Yeah.
do you think, and this is kind of a more taboo thing, but given creativity is a subject that, I think generally we don't grade, do you think this system of grading, do you think it's slowly going to evolve and change more throughout the future? Like, right now we don't grade creativity because it's, a different subject in general. But do you think one day, my great great grandkids will not get an A+ in math, rather, a score on a different type of measurement system as opposed to what we have now?
Well, what do you think? What would it look like?
I honestly, I couldn't tell you, but if I know with AI, what we do is it's very based in terms of percentage. Um, I built and created a conventional neural network to take so, frames out of my ads and give criticism before publishing it. And how we did that is we took a series of YouTube comments from good ads and bad ads, and we trained the AI off the good ads and the bad ads. And
Mhm.
then we would take our, ad that we were producing for a new startup, and we put it into our CNN generator, and that generator would, then compare it to all of the good and bad ads and all the different comments, and it would give us criticism. And
Nice.
it did that on a percentage of, 10%, good, 20% bad, 30% this, so forth and so forth. And it made me think, well, in the future, are we going to have traditional like A's and B's, or are we going to have you fell into this bracket, which is you're 30%, good at this, you're 10% good at that. Like, is that something that you could potentially see given less regulation, maybe? I mean,
I don't see it happening that way. But a decade ago, I went and lived 2 years in China, right? 2009 to 11. And it was something that we looked at when my kids were really young. So I think they were like 2 and 4, 3 and 5, and we were looking at doing something like this. So this is years ago, right? So we're talking 15 years ago plus. Yeah, probably about 15, 16 years ago, we were looking at doing this. And I remember coming across a school, I think it was in Thailand, and they had this really interesting marking system. And I saved the web page, but I went and looked for hours to find this, and I couldn't find the school, so I can't give the right school credit. But they had a marking system, and it was A, B, and I. And that was it. And so an A was you are exceeding expectation. You get this, and you're doing better than you need to. A B was you've met the expectation. You've done what you're required to do. And an I was in progress. And so you're in progress to getting to that level of competency. And I thought that was brilliant. And why I thought that was brilliant was I was a math teacher at the time, as I mentioned, right? So that was the main subject, math and science at that time. I'd done humanities a few years before. But at that time I was teaching math, and I realized, okay, so I have students that struggle in math, and they're going to finish this year with a C, right? So a C is 60%, 60, 64%, something like that, right? So when I tell you that you are competent in math at a C level, I'm saying that over 30% of what you do is wrong. Right? Like think that through. Over 30%, right? You're not competent at math. When I move that C person up in a grade, I'm moving someone ahead that lacks the competency to do grade 9 math really well.
Right.
Right. And so that feedback is not that interesting, right? It's not that helpful. It doesn't give anybody any meaningful feedback, especially when for some students that's just like across the board, they just don't understand math, and that's the level they're at. But for some, it's like, I totally get this and I don't get this, but my average is down here to 60%. And it would be far more interesting for me to be able to share feedback about where that student needs the help and needs the support than the letter C or the number 62. Right. And so I would love to see there be far less engagement in percentages and marks as a means to measure student success. And I've shared this on my podcast before, but this is something really fundamental here. There are students who go through high school and every mark is an A. They have always received an A. They know, excuse me, they know exactly how to get an A. They know how to please the teacher. And then they get into really good programs at our top universities. Here's, UBC, SFU. They get into a top program at BCIT, or one of our top colleges, and they flounder. Anywhere from 12 to 16% of students in the first year drop out
Yep.
of our universities, right? And of that 12 to 16%, a significant number of those are A students who went through our high school program getting A's all the way along, and then they get to university where they have the independence of the university prof expecting them to do things on their own without the support that they were handed in high school, and they flounder. There should be no student who is a solid A student who can't hack it in high school and university, but there are, right? And to me, that's tragic. And the reason it's tragic is because those students never were challenged enough to fail. They never had an experience where they thought, I don't know how to do this, right? And whereas at Inquiry Hub, we have students who fail at their inquiries all the time, who might still get an A in the course because they've demonstrated that they know what they did wrong. They can show that they would do it differently in the future. And their process of what they've done is the experience that makes them deserve to, because they actually get what they were supposed to do and how they did it. And they tried something so hard that most students that are going through the regular program never would have gone and learned something to the level that they learned it. Right. And so that's the part that I think where we need to look at education and go, well, what do these marks say anyway? Because in reality, I think, and let's say you wanted to go to film school.
Right.
I think the film you showed in grade 10, and then if you got to grade 12 and had made 3 more films, each improving in their caliber, right? Your portfolio would tell far more about you than C plus A, B, B on a report card, right? Your C++ programming that you did in grade 11 is going to tell you, where you designed this entire product that you actually tried to put to market and failed. Like let's be honest. Most kids don't create something in grade 10 or 11 that actually will get to market. But when you show your product that is a working, viable product that you created in grade 10, that you tried to bring to market and didn't, right? But that is your piece, that they can go and look at your code and see what you're doing, and then look at your code in grade 12 and go, look at what this kid has done.
Yeah.
That's significantly better than your A in programming that was an 86 or 88% or even 90%, right? Where you did one small project where you designed something, but the rest of the time you were following this cookie cutter right? And again, if you don't know the basics of C++, if you haven't done it, if you haven't actually done some practice, I'm not saying that you don't have to do those things, right? If you're left on your own to learn it, and you're learning, you're missing some key fundamental steps that you did not spend time on, and your code is sloppy as hell, right? And yeah, you can make it work, but when you look at the back end, it's absolute crap because you haven't learned the fundamentals, right? So again, there's that balance, right? Of having, but then going back to the coding, I think AI can teach you to code through creative games that you have to follow that are far more interesting than following a step-by-step with a teacher having everybody do the exact same thing on a blackboard or a whiteboard or an LCD projector board, right?
Right. What's MIT has a Scratch.
Yeah.
It just scratches genius. It's
like, Yeah, and when a kid gets to do a passion project in grade 6 where they're designing their own Scratch, and the beautiful thing about Scratch is people share what they've done, and you can take someone else's code and add to it, right?
Right.
And that idea, for years in school, that idea it would be classified as cheating,
Right.
right? But the reality is, when it comes to certain things, when you can look at the back end of what someone has structurally done that's really clever and really good, right, and add to it and make it better, right, that remix culture is something that we need to refigure out. And like, I don't want someone copying someone's essay and plagiarizing, and but that's getting harder to do without being caught anyway, right? And so but I do want people to go into the back end and to see what people do. I do want people to copy the really good videography strategies that top film producers and directors use. I want them to understand how to copy a genre really well, right? There were some kids that just did a Miss U in our schools. She, for her media class, had students do film noir style what were they called, not movie previews, what are they called,
Trailers.
trailer, thank you. She had them do film noir trailers for Christmas shows, like How the Grinch Stole Christmas, right?
Right.
And I mentioned that one because the Grinch one, they truly, like, it became this, like, everything about what they did captured the film noir essence, right? They had this little kid running, they had her running on her knees, and and the Grinch walking behind, right? And that whole idea of the person running and the scary person following slowly, and and the peeking around the corner as the Grinch is coming, and like, everything about it captured the essence of this noir, film noir kind of thing, in black and white. But for them to do that, they had to do it as well as they did. They had to understand the genre. They had to understand and to use the strategies, right? And so that kind of lesson, and I'll be honest, I saw another one of the films that one of the other groups did, and it missed it. And they were doing stuff. I'm going to get myself in trouble if they ever watch this, but they were doing stuff with Lego, and they got caught up in the Lego animation and not in understanding the story that they were trying to convey, and not understanding the genre they were trying to represent, right? Because they got lost in it, right? But that's the feedback. And when they see the quality of the other ones and they hear the feedback that the other group's getting, they're learning too, even though they didn't produce the thing that was really good, right? And that experience, right? That crappier video, that crappier Lego video could be step one in a portfolio where they get to something that they progress, that you see incredible growth.
Right.
Right. It doesn't become, oh, that was bad. It becomes, that was the lessons that got me to where I am. Right. And this portfolio, this experience that I had in high school, that I actually have documents from, that I can represent what my learning was. Right. And that's something, and we've complimented Inquiry Hub a lot. One of the things we haven't done well is some kids have created incredible portfolios, but we haven't made every kid do it in that way. All right. And I think that we need to, that's something school needs to do, because we don't need to have the best of the best show their work and then hide the rest. We need every kid to show what their progress is. Right. And we need to be able to represent that, because if we can't do that for every kid, then the only other way to do it is 86%, this is a B, and giving them those things. Right. So, I don't see, and then, okay, so that's the one side. The other side is related to what you were talking about, because you were right. You know that when you said the AI can tell you the 10% and everything like that, the other part that I think you're going to see a lot of in schools is micro credentialing.
Right. Yes.
Right. And that speaks to what you were talking about, where, there are certain skills. Like if you're doing C++, there's certain things you have to be able to do with code and have to be able to do to be competent. Right.
Right.
And there are things you can do where you can represent, an AI can figure out if you've done it well or not. Right. There's AI that, you run your program and it tells you, you should have done this here. You should have done this here. You should have done this here, because it's very specific. Right.
Yep.
And you get that feedback. So then it gives you another assignment, and then it's expecting you to do it right. And if it doesn't, here's what you do. Here's what you do. And if you keep getting it wrong, you don't get that credential till you get to the point that you get it right.
Right.
Right. And so that micro credentialing, that can't be what school's about.
Right.
Right. That can't be, school is about, here's 10,000, and that's a ridiculous number. Here's 10,000 micro credentials that you have to meet in order to accomplish this. If that's all it is, then AI, you may as well just go to the school of AI and forget about teachers. Right. But if you have to get a certain amount of micro credentials and understand how to do C++, and then the teacher gives you an assignment that involves creativity or involves your ability to input and create and do things in a way that is unique and not just the cookie cutter. And then you and the teacher have to evaluate, did you accomplish the task, and what was how was the actual language that you used, and how good is your code, and you're reflecting on it, and the teacher's giving you feedback, and you're doing something that on one end is just making something easier for you to do, or making something that's visually attractive, and on the other extreme, being put out in the world and helping other people, right? But where you're actually adding value beyond the school, that's where the teaching becomes really exciting.
No, that's true.
And the learning for the student.
Right.
Yeah.
And theoretically, if let's take like C++, for example, theoretically, if you don't meet some of these core competencies in C++, then you would just get an I, right? So
Exactly.
I totally agree with that. That would be a much more constructive grading system to the one we currently use. I think in space, specifically in like space tech, something we've seen a lot in the last 10 years has been deregulation and the breakdown of traditional structures. And I think that's going to be something that we see in a lot of different fields. I think it's just starting with us. And the only reason why it's starting with us is because the price per launch has been dropped significantly, especially with reusable rockets. But I think it's a wave that's going to impact everything else. I was talking to Georgie last week, and one of the things he said that I think is, just like, it's one of those quotes I want to print out and put on my wall.
Yeah.
Every company is about to become a tech and data company.
Oh, that's interesting.
I think there, I think that branches off even to the education system, right?
Yeah.
If you can collect better data and you use different systems, you can almost educate in a different way, and a way that works for more people than our cookie cutter system does now.
That's interesting. You've mentioned Georgie a couple times. He wasn't a student at Inquiry Hub, but he was a student of a program called YEL in our school, Young Entrepreneurship Leadership Launchpad, where students actually go through a business model plan where they come together as a group, decide on a product, design the product, work with a mentor in the community, and then do like a Dragon's Den style pitch. And I think it was 3 or 4 years ago. And you compete against other districts as well. Georgie's team won for, I think it's called C-Ring, a piece of jewelry that would aid students who are, it's for women who, you know, have to walk alone on campus, or in digital situations where it's a panic button that would immediately create connect to the phone, and contact 911 and create a live audio so you can actually hear what's going on without the person having to dial anything or to have the phone of it. You know, if the phone's, even if the phone's in a purse, it still becomes a speakerphone immediately, you know, and as a safety device for people who may be in vulnerable situations. That's also a nice jewelry piece. And watching them go through that process, right? And then deciding after this is done, after this course is done, that they're actually going to pursue this idea and actually try to create a business of it. I mean, what a great experience for students, you know, and an amazing experience to be able to have while still in school, right?
Yep.
And
Yeah.
so I think I think we need to create more experiences like that, you know. And is there anything else? I mean, we've been on for quite a time. Is there anything else about the future of education that you can see where you're excited about what's happening?
You know, I think we've covered a lot of bases in the last hour and 40 minutes.
Yeah,
You know, other than that, I think that pretty much sums it up.
yeah,
I think tools like Zoom, you know, like we're using right now, uh, you know, that's a whole other topic, but I think they can be used in a really constructive way, and will be in terms of education in the future. Um, but other than that,
yeah. Well, you know, thanks for initiating this. I hope I gave you what you wanted.
yeah. Well, no, for sure. We were able to talk about a wide variety of things. I
Yeah,
really appreciate you taking your time and talking to me
yeah.
about all this.
Yeah, well, we had some other topics, but I think we'll leave it at that. This has been longer than expected, and
Yes, for sure.
as you know, I can ramble. So we've
Well,
we've had we've
well,
had
it's
some good
good.
good chat this morning. I want to thank you again for contacting me, and I'm sure we'll chat again.
Yeah, no, well, I look forward to it. We'll stand by.
All right, fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks.